Hello and welcome to DisrupTV. My name is Vala Afshar. I'm your co-host for the next hour. My other co-host, Ray Wong, is in Dubai, and so we're going to have Larry Dignan, editor-in-chief at Constellation, joining me as co-host for episode 375. We want to go around the table and have our guests introduce themselves, tell us what you're going to talk about, and where you're dialing in from. And we'll do in reverse order. So Larry, let's start with you.
Larry Dignan, editor-in-chief of Constellation Insights. I'm outside Philadelphia, and I'll be talking agentic AI, enterprise software disruption, and probably like 3 other things.
Great. Jeremy?
So I'm Jeremy Kahn. I'm the author of Mastering AI, a survival guide to our superpowered future, which is a book that's out at the moment. I'm also the AI editor at Fortune, where I lead a small team that covers AI. And I'm coming in to you from Oxford, England at the moment.
Oh, terrific. Thank you so much for joining us in late afternoon, early evening. All right, Al, let's start the show.
All right, here we go.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us on DisrupTV. My name is Vala Afshar. I'm the Chief Digital Evangelist at Salesforce and your co-host for the next hour. We welcome you to join us on X at DisrupTV Show. Send your questions to Larry, myself, and our distinguished guest, and we'll do our best to answer them live. Normally, this is the part where I would introduce my co-host, Ray Wong. Ray is on assignment in Dubai and will not be able to join us, but we're fortunate to have Larry Dignan, editor-in-chief at Constellation Research. Larry was most recently Celonis Media editor-in-chief, where he sat at the intersection of media and marketing. Larry's a former editor-in-chief of ZDNet and has covered the technology industry and transformation trends for more than 2 decades, publishing articles across numerous media outlets. Larry is also an adjunct professor at Temple University and an advisory board for the Fox Business School's Institute of Business and Information Technology. You can follow Larry on X at LDIGNAN. Welcome, Larry, to DisrupTV.
Thanks, Vala. Long time no see.
It has been. It's the first time that you and I are on the show since you've joined editor-in-chief in Constellation. So thank you again for subbing in.
I was a substitute teacher for you, I think.
But, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Well, it's our privilege and our honor to have Jeremy Kahn, author of a new book. It was launched in July, best-selling book, Mastering AI, a survival guide to our superpowered future. Jeremy is an award-winning journalist for Fortune magazine, where he covers artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. In addition to cover stories and features as AI editor for Fortune magazine, Jeremy writes Fortune's weekly Eye on AI newsletter and co-chairs its Brainstorm AI technology conferences. Previously, Jeremy wrote about technology, including AI, for Bloomberg. His writing on a range of subjects also appeared in New York Times, Newsweek, The Atlantic, Boston Globe, New Republic, Slate, and many other major media outlets. Jeremy is a former managing editor of the New Republic. You can follow Jeremy on X at Jeremy, Jeremy, Akahn. Welcome, Jeremy, to DisrupTV.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Congratulations on the book. That's fantastic. The book starts with a premise right up front. Within the next 5 years, you predict that AI will disrupt every industry, every enterprise, and vastly increase efficiency and productivity. It will restructure workforces, making AI co-pilots a must for every knowledge worker. But then you balance the narrative by saying that while this new technology has a bright future, it also casts a dark and fearful shadow. AI will provoke pervasive, disruptive, potentially devastating knock-on effects. Let's start with talking about your book. What are the dangers of AI technology that we should be most vigilant and knowing and better understanding?
Yeah, I think there are several, the book tries to highlight some of the risks that I think aren't getting enough attention. And one of the ones, some of the ones I worry about most are AI's potentially negative effects on our own sort of human intelligence, both IQ and EQ. So I worry very much about the effect that sort of overuse of the technology may have on our critical thinking skills. I worry about the proposition that is, I think very easy to fall into with this technology, that writing and thinking are completely separable tasks, and that somehow, you don't have to do the hard work of writing anymore. You just give it some, bullet points, let one of these AI models go. It will do all the writing for you. But I think actually writing and thinking are very closely tied up together. And actually it's through writing and the hard work of sort of composition that we often refine ideas. We find the holes in arguments. A lot of our reasoning is refined through writing, actually. So, I think the idea that, we're going to essentially outsource all our writing to AI systems is problematic from that respect. And then I worry very much about the use of chatbots as sort of as companions. And, there've been lots of people who have endorsed chatbots as sort of a cure for the loneliness epidemic. But I actually worry that it's going to make our isolation from one another much worse, and that there'll be a tendency, particularly among young people, to become very over-reliant on the use of chatbots as social companions, potentially even as kind of romantic proxies, and that people will not be encouraged to seek out human contact. And I think the relationship you have with a chatbot, even if it mimics kind of human interaction, is very different from the interaction you have with a real person. Chatbots have, they can kind of mimic having desires and demands and wants, but they have no actual desires, demands, or wants, and therefore, they're never, it's never going to be a true relationship. It's always going to be, I think, in some ways, feel very easy compared to human relationships, and I think that's the trap, is that a lot of people will think, oh, this is great. I have this thing that's always supportive, always empathetic, always, is trying to be affirming of me and my needs, and is this great listener all the time. And isn't that great? It's so much better than a real human relationship, which is messy, and people, you don't have to deal with people who are in bad moods and people who have desires that might conflict with yours, and you have to learn how to deal with that conflict. And I do worry, particularly for young people, if this becomes a ubiquitous technology, which I think it will, that it will have this very negative impact on our social interaction. So those are two of the risks that I'm most concerned about. And then in kind of the business world, while I'm very positive on, I think, the effect it's going to have in terms of macroeconomics, in terms of labor productivity, I think it'll allow certain companies that master this technology to really accelerate and be leaps and bounds ahead of others. But what I worry about there is around certain business models around how this technology may be offered. I worry about sort of pay-for-play kind of arrangements where you have models that are based either on engagement or based on advertising, where you may have chatbots or AI agents that go out and do things where the action is and the outcome is influenced, or the content generated is influenced by payments that you're not aware of, that somebody's made to the tech vendor. And I think we've seen some of these models with social media, and I worry about the extension of these models to the world of AI. I think at the very least there should be transparency if there's any such arrangement, that a user should always know that if they're getting a response in part because it was paid for by some sponsor, that be very apparent to the user. But I much prefer models, business models, which would be subscription models that would align the interests of users with the tech vendors, I think, much more closely. And I think actually, to the extent possible, government should try to encourage those business models and discourage ones that are, essentially kind of freemium or free models that are based around engagement and an advertising-based model.
How many years away do you think these risks are really to the point where we really have to worry about them? I mean, I take something like writing, right? I've used it to summarize a transcript here and there, but I mean, honestly, I every model has its own kind of unique characteristics, but ChatGPT, it's a wordy seventh grader.
Yeah,
Like,
it's real.
It's
no,
really,
it is. It's not a. It's not a. It's not a
It's an
great.
intern. It's an
Yeah,
intern.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
a
well,
kid trying to
junior
make a
intern,
yeah.
5-page paper look like a 10-page paper.
Yeah.
That's what it does. It's so damn wordy, it drives me crazy.
But stepping back to Jeremy, so I have a 14, 18, and 21-year-old. So two in college, one in just started high school. And I often tell them, you read to improve your writing, you write to improve your thinking. But I got to tell you, as a parent, I'm not monitoring how 3 of my children, 14 to 21, are using AI to draft their thoughts, their thinking, their homework. And so I am a little bit worried. Like, is their ability for critical thinking degrade over time, because that cognitive download from them to some smart language model means that over time they're not asking the right questions. They don't have a systems thinking approach to solving big hairy problems. So I feel I agree with everything you just said, but I also, so for me, one of those concerns is imminent, Larry. I don't really know how my children are leveraging technology.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that the issue of writing for kids, I think, is very much here now. I mean, I think kids are starting to use this to do all kinds of writing, and I think that's problematic. Of course, they're doing it, maybe without their teachers knowing, without their parents knowing, as Vala said. But it's I think they're definitely using it in that way, and that is slightly concerning. And I think there's only going to be more use of that over time. In the business context, I think it just depends on what you're writing. I totally agree with you. People keep asking me, "Oh, did you use AI to write your book?" And I say, no, it wasn't good enough to write my book the way I wanted it written, and I don't use it to write articles for Fortune either, because it's just not at that level. However, I've seen and talked to plenty of people in the corporate world, particularly on marketing teams, people who don't consider themselves good writers, who do not actually consider writing as kind of the essential part of what they do, who use it all the time to draft emails, to do first drafts of some marketing message. And again, I feel like sometimes that you get very sloppy thinking sometimes in those documents. I think as a result of that, people are too readily accepting of the kind of what the model generates, and sometimes not critical enough editors of what the model generates. So I think we're already starting to see that risk in some functional roles within companies. So I'm concerned that risk, at least, is here imminent, right now. On the sort of social risk, that's maybe a little further off, but not that far off. Already I see. My kids have, Snapchat, it's got Snap AI, and they've made it pretty addictive. You can have a snap streak with your AI. And so it's like you interact with that. And from what we know, I mean, I was interested to hear some of the things that, for instance, Mustafa Suleyman said prior, when he was still at Inflection, prior to this kind of interesting acqui-hire, which had to move to Microsoft. But he was saying, he wanted people to use Inflection as this way to offload, the burdens of the day, as you would to potentially a best friend or a romantic partner, a spouse. And people were doing it. I mean, he said, it was interesting to watch how people were using the app. And so I think that threat is potentially here right now. If you look at Replica and some of the issues they had when they actually made it at one point much harder to have kind of these erotic conversations with the Replica chatbots, because they'd gotten in trouble in Italy because they didn't have correct parental controls. So Italy was very concerned that kids under 18 could have these kind of romantic, erotic conversations, perhaps inappropriately with Replica chatbots. So they actually removed that kind of functionality completely from Replica, and they had this huge outpouring of opprobrium and dismay from people, this sort of subgroup that have been using Replica chatbots as a kind of erotic outlet, who, some of them, there was a story in the Washington Post where they went out and interviewed some of these people who really kind of were in grief and were bereft at the fact that this erotic companion that they'd been used to using was no longer available to them. Look, it's a small subpopulation right now, but I think it's growing. And I think as these things become more ubiquitous, we're going to see more that these sort of subpopulations grow. And it's going to become a more common thing, I think, again, particularly if you look at young people, to use this as a kind of sounding board, which I think if you use it a little bit like that, fine. But if it's, if it becomes your kind of exclusive outlet, it's really problematic. So I think that threat is not too far off either.
Do you think that threat's going to be driven by the current social media giants, or do you think it comes from somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I do worry a little bit about what is Meta's plan for its AI systems. There definitely, it sort of may fit well with that. Same thing with Snap. Same thing with potentially some of the other social media platforms, TikTok and others. It's possible we will see some new platform come up. Although it's interesting what happened with character AI. To look at what happened there. They were trying to create, be a new powerhouse essentially for people who wanted to create these kind of chatbots, and we're not able to kind of go it alone. The expense of building the models is apparently too great, and they've been acqui-hired back into Google. So with again, one of these strange kind of, we'll hire the team and license the tech deals, and leave some sort of zombie company out there. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's very interesting that I think in general, if it's one of the other themes of the book, there's going to be this sort of tendency with AI, I think, to concentrate power in the hands of the largest tech players that are already out there. They are doing best at sort of so far at creating this technology. The expense is so huge of training and in some cases running these models at scale that it's really only the biggest tech companies that are out there offering these.
Let's talk about this superpowered future and the most beneficial impact of AI that you write in your book. What are some of the things that you think will bring joy to work and allow us to have a better society and better core values?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I do think there are a lot of positive impacts we're going to see. I think we're going to have positive impacts on productivity. I really do think some of the most burdensome and tiresome parts of our jobs could be automated away, and that will actually be a good thing. I think for a lot of us, there are parts of our jobs that we do not like to do, that are repetitive, that are kind of mindless, that are not particularly, value producing, and certainly not the best use of our intellectual abilities. And I really do think that a lot of those tasks we're going to see automated in the coming 5 years, and that will be good. I think it'll make a lot of people find their jobs more enjoyable. If you look at what's already happened in surveys of coders who use GitHub Copilot, it's not just that it makes them more productive, it's also that when they've been surveyed about their job satisfaction, it's gone up by a greater percentage actually than their productivity has. So it's like, people like using these tools. We've seen similar kind of anecdotal evidence from law firms that have deployed these legal co-pilots. And the law firms are interesting because actually they, in some cases, have reported that it's really hard to tell if they're actually getting much productivity gain from the use of the co-pilots right now because of the danger of hallucination, the need to, really carefully check the work product. They're finding that, well, maybe it's not so time saving as we thought, or labor saving. And yet the employee satisfaction among these younger associates using this technology has gone up a lot. And people feel like this is something they want to be using at their workplace. So I think that's interesting. Again, I think that's one of the positive impacts we'll see in work. Outside of sort of the use in knowledge work, I think there's going to be these tremendous positive effects in healthcare. I think it's going to have really big impacts, positive impacts on human health, both through drug discovery, where we're already starting to see acceleration of the preclinical phases. The clinical phases, it's interesting. AI may have some interesting impacts there, but you can't really accelerate those too much. You still need to do clinical trials, and those clinical trials take a certain amount of time, and you're not going to be able to shorten that process. But the preclinical work, which in some cases take as long as 4 years, there's a potential to shorten that to, in some cases, just months of work till you could get to initial clinical trials. So that, I think, is going to really accelerate the bringing on of new therapies. Some of the initial findings from AI designed drugs is also they're much more effective with lower toxicity and things like this than drugs discovered using traditional methods. And so I think, again, tremendous impact there. I think the use of wearable devices combined with AI is also going to be a big plus in the health space. So again, huge potential. And actually, I think education, where people really freaked out about ChatGPT when ChatGPT first came out, is another area where AI will overwhelmingly have a positive impact. And I think teachers are going to have to change how they teach a little bit in order to make avoid some of those dangers I talked about before about over-reliance on this, where you just use it to write everything for you and you don't learn to write and you don't think too critically. I think teachers are going to have to redesign curriculums to make sure we're still teaching kids these essential skills. But I think if you use an AI copilot that's specifically designed for education, a little bit like the Conmigo product that Khan Academy's put out, that as a product designed to prevent kids who are using it from using it to cheat, and yet it kind of uses a Socratic method to lead students towards the right answer, to make them do the thinking and to think through the steps that they need to answer a problem. I think those kind of personal tutors are going to be incredibly powerful. And the fact that we're going to all have this kind of personal tutor in our pocket, I think it's going to be a tremendous boon to kids, but also to adults too. It'll enable this kind of lifelong learning of all kinds of skills that you didn't have before. And I really think it can, do tremendous things for education.
I got to tell you, one fear I have is both my 14-year-old son and I, we love sports. He fact checks me all the time. So I can no longer have an opinion about something like who's the best point guard in the 80s. And I'll say, whatever, Dennis Johnson. And he'll but Dennis Johnson ranked 8th in scoring and 12th in rebound. And this guy was ahead of him. And next thing I know, he's telling me it's Isaiah Thomas or whomever. My point is that it's not asymmetric in terms of the teacher student. The students now have access, where if Larry is teaching his classes, I'm sure you're maybe worried like I am, where the students can fact check you instantly.
Oh, well, I just give them whatever I learned that day almost.
Yeah.
That's my secret sauce. I mean, I think with what you're talking about, I think the umbrella term for all this stuff with AI, it really boils down to coaching. Like we had somebody in a BT 150, that's Constellation Research's like digital transformation folks, ran a family-run company and is using Gen AI to basically coach people how to get along. Because it's a family-run company, right? I mean, you bring a lot more to work than just your, usual work beefs. And he said the productivity boom was big there. I think the whole coaching, even the life coaching, I think all that stuff is going to get very interesting, like for healthcare and like you mentioned, tutors. I think if it's used that way, I think it's going to be very beneficial. I've run a few documents through sentiment analysis just to see if I sounded like an asshole or not. The answer was yes. But you can do this stuff.
You're right? A critical thinking person, so
it's like
you have unfiltered content. I've read your stuff.
I could be a little chippy, right? So you run it through, and you're kind of like, all right, do I sound, dear OpenAI, do I sound like an ass? And
Right.
This sounds very negative or whatever, right? So I think using it that way, I think could be, I think the mental health implications are going to be huge.
So will AI rewire our brains to think about tone, sentiment, attunement, ways for us to be a little bit more mindful of, or maybe chew on our words a bit more before we spit them out? What are your thoughts, Jeremy, about AI's impact on how we think?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm worried about some of the implications about how we think, but that's interesting that it might, through this kind of coaching, actually improve our thinking and maybe make us a little more emotionally intelligent. I think it's interesting. I think possibly yes. Again, in general, I think it works best if you have specific, essentially kind of coaching products or co-pilots, or at least personas that are very carefully designed to do that and to really encourage that. Because otherwise, I think, again, you just run into this thing where it's a crutch and you actually, I don't have to think about being emotionally intelligent because this thing will just catch all of my really, when I'm being an asshole, it'll just catch me up, and so I don't have to worry. I can just be be as much an asshole as I want, and it'll correct it before I send out the email, or it'll, especially if it's not, yes, it's different if you're talking to somebody one-on-one. Obviously, that area, the coaching might be different. But if it's emails or something, or your messages on Slack, look, it'll just catch it before it actually goes out. I don't have to worry about it, and I think that's a danger. I don't think you want that. That won't actually improve, what you're doing. But I think there is potential to help it. If you look at cognitive behavioral therapy, where people are supposed to do this homework and different exercises to improve and change their thought processes, which has been found to be, effective. Yeah, absolutely. This could be a kind of CBT based coach for people, like, to work through some of those issues. I definitely think there's potential improvements for mental health if used correctly. I think we have to be a little bit cautious. Some of the I looked at, when I was researching the book, some of the studies on the use of chatbots, specifically for therapy. Most of the studies are pretty underpowered. They haven't had too many people in them, and they mostly have compared the use of a chatbot to nothing. So it's like, compared to no therapy, is the chatbot better? Well, it turns out yes. Like, using the chatbot's better than nothing. Is it as good as being a human therapist? There have been very few studies that have actually done a direct comparison.
In the process of writing a bestseller, I mean, you're talking years of research, hundreds of conversations, thousands of hours. Was there something that challenged your dominant logic going into this process of writing a book? Was there some revelation that you think was very important, that maybe was a blind spot you had, or something that you think the readers should absolutely walk away with knowing that this is part of the playbook that you really need to deep dive into?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I was struck by just how fundamental this platform shift might be. There was aspects of this I hadn't really thought about. All the implications of what happens if this becomes the primary means by which we access the internet, and essentially agents become, the thing that goes out and does our bidding for us, and that we're not really out there surfing the web directly ourselves. All of the implications of that are kind of mind-blowing and hard to think through. And I feel like a lot of businesses have not really taken on board how big this could be. And thought through, well, strategically, what does that mean for them? And then likewise, I mean, there's this interesting idea of how much software do you really need, or can you create a lot of bespoke software, both for yourself personally, potentially, or for your company on the fly? That got some attention in the past week when Klarna came out and claimed that they were ditching all of this, all of their SaaS products, because they could just create their own software. I mean, I don't know whether we should really believe all of what Klarna is saying here. They are, trying to burnish their financials and everything ahead of a likely IPO. So that gives them some incentives to maybe inflate what's actually going on. However, I do think, like, to the extent that it's true, that's kind of a profound thing. It could really shake up the tech industry in a big way. That is the one instance where you might see a real change to the lineup of kind of the big tech players. Because otherwise, I think most of the trends we're seeing around AI simply reinforce the power of kind of big tech. But that idea that, maybe we don't need off-the-shelf software as much anymore, that's very interesting, and that would be highly disruptive.
Larry, your thoughts?
Oh my God, I've been following this this has been my pet topic for like the last 4 months. I think Gen AI is going to be the new UI for enterprise software, and I think...
You mean conversational, multimodal,
yes,
input output prompts?
It's going to be the way to get into... It's going to make all these enterprise software platforms basically systems of record.
Going backwards from
totally
starting at system of record to system of engagement to system of intelligence.
So what happens when all your SaaS providers basically become fancy databases? If you look at something like Amazon Q, it's that whole bespoke software thing. Yesterday, there was Palantir had their AI Pecan, where they basically just bring out customers to talk about what they whipped up quickly. There's a company, I think I'm probably blanking on it, but it's called Associate Materials. It's basically home building stuff. And they're still running a mainframe from 1974. And they were able to take all these legacy systems and just take the data, put it in an ontology. And they're like, and the CIO is basically like, we'll never buy an ERP system again.
There's an overlay.
Because we have this overlay. And I think that is A, compelling, B, very frightening if you're not like a platform, which is why I think ServiceNow scares a lot of people, because they're kind of playing that shtick. But I do think I think enterprise software has got the potential to seriously be disrupted.
Jeremy, my final question, when I go to San Francisco, like I'll be there next week, I'm bound to see Waymos driving in every street corner. It's kind of strange to look at a car in the middle of traffic. There's no driver, no steering wheel. It's just autonomously taking people A to B. And there's 5 levels of autonomy where you get to a point where there is no steering wheel, there is no driver, and the job is no longer driving the car. You can go in the car and binge watch Netflix or work on your CRM. The entire nature of job to be done changes in this paradigm. And now we're talking about autonomous enterprise. Your thoughts on tasks, roles, teams, entire lines of business potentially in this autonomous enterprise where you can scale your capability and there's a cognitive download from us to humans to intelligent software?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see profound changes in the way enterprises are organized for sure. I think everybody's job is going to change. I'm not a big believer that we're going to see mass unemployment. I do not think that's going to happen. I think actually most people will still have a job. And in fact, I think this technology will, like most previous technologies, create whole new categories of roles. I think it will enable entrepreneurship. So we're actually going to see more new businesses. I think, most people, we're going to see more employment, not less. So I'm not worried about mass unemployment, but I do think everybody has to be prepared for what they do to change. The tasks that they perform are going to change, and businesses are going to have to figure out, well, what does that mean for how I organize employees and how I organize divisions? I think that's going to be pretty profound. And I think the businesses that figure out this out fastest will have a real advantage. You cannot, sit still with this at all. So I think absolutely that's happening. Can you automate a whole enterprise? I mean, some people thought, and I talked in the book about, some small experiments where people tried to run whole small businesses completely autonomously. They sort of worked for a little while. I don't think you could run an entire business completely autonomously yet, at least not successfully for very long. But I think that idea is like getting to be slightly more practical. So you have to start thinking in that direction, even if we can't really get there. A little bit like self-driving cars, where it's like, yeah, Waymo's out there. It's pretty amazing, but it's taken a lot longer to get there than people thought. It's scaling up also much more slowly because it turns out, to run a system like the Waymo cars, you really do need all this mapping. You have to know that geography extremely well. It helps that you're in a place where the weather isn't too extreme. And it's a geofence kind of thing. I don't know. It's like there are limits. I think that's also going to be true with some of these other AI technologies and some of the ways we use Gen AI within businesses, that it is going to be profound. In 5 years, we're all going to be using this in some way. Will we go to the fully autonomous division? I don't know. Maybe a few places we will in a couple companies, but I think that sort of fully automating entire functions is longer off than some people would think. I think it's gonna take a while. I think the technology it's unreliable enough that you still kind of want a human in the loop most of the time. Yes. So you have to kind of figure out how to do that, and how to really have this technology complement what humans do. I mean, that's my other big takeaway from having written the book, is really so many of the risks of this technology can be avoided if you think of the technology as complementary. A lot of the risks come from the direct substitution for human labor. If you want to go to full automation, then you have all these tremendous risks. If you still have a person kind of working alongside the system, you have other issues to deal with. And I talk about that in the book too, about how do you do that? How do you make sure the person remains vigilant about errors, and how do you bring out the kind of best in people as well as using the best that AI offers? Lots of interesting issues there. But I think as long as you don't take humans out of the loop completely, you avoid some of the risks. As soon as you start talking about full automation, it brings in all kinds of additional risk. And I think actually we can avoid a lot of that and actually reap a lot of the benefits by thinking of this technology not as a direct substitute.
You had mentioned that you didn't think it'd result in like a lot of job loss and all that. How much of that opinion is based on demographics?
Yeah,
I mean, we're getting older, we're having less kids.
Well, that's part of it. There are so many fields where we do not have enough people anymore, including all these knowledge working fields. So like, look at accounting. Accountants are not going to lose jobs on a net basis because of this technology. There are not enough public company, accountants to go around. They're so desperate for accountants. They're talking about, lowering the standards in most states for it, the board certification to become a public company accountant. I think this technology potentially, can bring more people into that profession, because maybe you can take people with much less experience, maybe who have they have some experience with bookkeeping and they've done some degree, but they may not have done an MBA, for instance, or something. And you with a co-pilot, potentially have them do some of these higher order accounting tasks, which also, by the way, can democratize this technology or access that service. So you have small companies right now, maybe they can't afford to have a good accountant. Now, with a co-pilot, they maybe can get that level of service. Same thing with legal services. There are lots of small businesses that just cannot not afford legal advice. Potentially now they have access to legal advice at a lower price point. So I think that, there's all this pent up demand for these professions, professional services, and yet not enough people in most of these professions. It's not the case that we have too many lawyers or too many doctors or too many accountants, no matter what, some people might want you to think. It's actually, we don't have enough people. And then, yeah, absolutely, across certainly the developed nations, you have declining birth rates, you have a declining workforce, an aging population. And yeah, I think there's just not going to be enough jobs. So we need this technology actually to maintain economic growth.
Absolutely. Jeremy, thank you so much. Congratulations on your new book. Jeremy
you.
Kahn, author of Mastering AI, a survival guide to our superpowered future. Jeremy's also AI editor for Fortune magazine. And I love your advice. I feel like it's like John Wooden-esque advice. Go fast, but don't hurry. That's one way to de-risk adoption and optimization of AI in your business. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and congrats again on your bestseller.
Oh, thanks, Val, and thanks, Larry.
Thanks. You. Cheers.
All right.
See, so now, Larry, you experience what Ray and I experience every Friday, where someone like yourself or Jeremy comes, a big brain, makes us think about all these things that we hadn't thought about. And thankfully, it creates my editorial calendar of what I want to cover and research and write about. For me, in this space, I feel like you feel like you know a lot until you learn a little, and then you realize there's just so much you don't know. I'm here with my co-host, Larry Dignan, editor-in-chief at Constellation Research. Larry was prior editor-in-chief at ZDNet. This is where I met Larry. Larry was kind enough 5-6 years ago to invite me to ZDNet. And now fast forward, I think I've written over 500 articles for the publication. That's because Larry was kind enough to invite me to contribute, which is, I'm grateful. People ask me, oh, you got a big social network. And if they ask me more questions about how I got there, I would eventually get to, well, this guy, Larry, helped me write my thoughts on one of the most influential publications.
Well, I had an army of bloggers. I had an army of smart people.
You definitely talk about an ecosystem multiplier. I write 1 or 2 articles a week. That's my habit. Last month I wrote 7 articles for ZDNet. So, and speaking to writing, I haven't totally inventoried your outputs, but you've been a content machine your entire career. 12 years as editor-in-chief of ZDNet. You are writing now more than I've ever seen. Is that true? Is that a right?
It might be, but it's because Ray hates meetings, and I don't have to show up on all these calls. Like usually, back in the media days, my writing would be a part-time job mixed in with a bunch of calls about nonsense. And we don't really do that. So
flow is around us. We just come up with clever ways of disrupting flow. And now you're in a writing flow, because when I go to the Constellation Insights page, every day you're contributing. Every day I see stuff. And I'm like, how does Larry, and these are long form, some of these are 3,000 word posts. And I'm like, how is he doing it? How are you, give advice to company founders, influencers, media personalities?
Well,
how do you build that writing muscle? Avoid meetings?
It's just reps. It's a lot of reps. I used to be a sports writer back in the day where you cover a game, write the story in your head, and then get to the newspaper to put it out. I've always been just used to deadlines. And the other thing, it's kind of that publish or perish mentality. And it's also every day is an audition. So if I don't produce, I'm toast. It's just kind of that. That's just the way it is.
I subscribe to that. I'm not posting every day long form, but I'm active. I'm sharing content, curated or original, every day. And I've done that for 11 plus years. I haven't missed a day. I don't know if I should say this because this is live. And I'm not sure what it says about me. Someone who's had COVID 3 times, someone who travels the globe, but I haven't missed a day on social platforms in 11 plus years. Not one day. So I don't know. Is that obsessive compulsive? I don't know. I don't know if that's
I don't know. I lean more unsocial.
Yeah. But then again, you're writing long form every day, so you're putting in the reps. You're going to the gym, but the motivation for you is that in a hyper connected knowledge sharing economy, if you don't have certain cadence, like if the world of enterprise hardware software vendors or clients at Constellation, if they don't hear from you for a week or 2 weeks or a month, are you now lost? Because the news cycle, there's so much happening every day.
The other thing is, if I don't write it, I don't retain it.
Okay.
I'm just one of those people. Like I could sit there and listen to something. I'm like, it's not sticking. If I write it down, it'll stick.
It'll stick. Yeah, 7, 8, 10 times retention just by writing. Okay, you've been writing a lot, and you've covered agentic AI. I mean, AI power.
The buzzword du jour, which so we need to connect next week.
Yes. Are you at my annual conference?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
You mean Agent Force? Oh, Dreamforce?
Yeah.
No, I think we should connect next week and just shoot me an email and let me know if you're tired of hearing the term or not.
Yeah, I've been writing about it for months.
Right.
I've written, I wrote about 6 levels of autonomous work, where I'm predicting when you will see lines of business operated by it's just like a machine-led human assist. That's the inflection. It's not human-led machine assist. We're we're going to a different. And it's no longer building software that helps you and I do the work. It's building software that does the work, and that has a different pricing model, different go-to-market, different dominant logic, challenging. It's
a fascinating pivot. My newsletter tomorrow, Saturday, is basically looking at it, right? Because I went back to. I think this year it really started bubbling up around Google Cloud Next, where they were talking about agents.
Yeah.
And then you can just kind of see it snowball. And then I started looking into agentic as a term, which actually comes from psychology, from a Stanford psychology prof. And I've seen it applied to everything from portfolio management to psychology so the term's been around probably 20 something years, agentic, so to speak. And I'm just kind of following these trends. And, I think I'm wondering from a buzzword perspective, do we just crumple up generative AI and throw it over our shoulder at this point? And it's because, Salesforce talked about Agentforce yesterday a good bit. Still have some questions. I'm assuming they're going to talk a little more about it next week. You can tell me now if you want. And we had ServiceNow with their Xanadu release, which has a lot of the agent AI in it. Google Cloud, Thomas Kurian was at that Goldman Sachs conference, and he talked about how they were using agents in, I think it was some telco accounts, charging by the conversation, which is kind of what Salesforce is trying to do. And Oracle even worked this in. So the drumbeat of agentic AI is basically hitting that drum solo part, right? It's sort of it was kind of slow, back in March, it was kind of slow. You'd hear a little more. And now we're to the point where, you're flying around the stage, banging drums, going, a little crazy. And I think we've
learned a lot. We've learned a lot in the last, the rate of learning and experimenting. Right? Yeah, you had deep language understanding that had to come into play. You have to understand the level of reasoning and decision making that a language model, your do-it-yourself experiments, quickly realized that if you didn't have access to private data, if you didn't have some sort of permission-based, access-based trust layer, and that meant having access to private data and rules and governance, and then ability to do something, to take action.
Right.
So the generative term in the consumer space will stay because you don't necessarily have to have a system approach to all of this, but an agent is now it's a software system. So it'll take the LLM's language and reasoning capabilities, but you have to orchestrate it with a collection of topics that matter to you. So domain expertise and then actions and instructions within the domain. So it's a super, I mean, Gartner's been talking about this for a decade, like composability. You're going to see high level of composability. So when you hear like an agent for sales or an agent for service, you take that function, sales and service. Now you have to define topics like jobs to be done within these lines of business. Then you have to have instructions for the software to try to emulate what the human is doing, and then the type of actions. So the guardrails have to be built in. So it becomes like precision level programming once, because you program it once. That's the beauty of it.
Right.
And because it's so smart and has an iterative approach to it, you don't have to have a hard-coded decision tree for everything. It will iterate, and with the minimum set of guardrails, one time, it'll be over time smart enough to have reasoning. It's really, we're going to talk about it. We've given a name to it, whatever. I don't want to bore people with Salesforce names or any other set of Einstein Atlas, this, that, and the other.
Right.
But there are building blocks you're going to see next week in action that speak to this super cool way of doing things at scale. That's like, if you're in a business and you're not applying a machine power multiplier to the way you do work, you're going to fall behind. Like the military calls the operating models that they use to govern their weapon design SUDA. It was a white paper written a couple of years ago with a general co-author who talked about the SUDA model in the military. So the largest organization spending the most on innovative technology. And the SUDA was ability to sense, the S, understand, decide, and act. It used to be called UDA model. It's been modified to now SUDA: sense, understand, decide, and act.
Much better acronym, by the way.
Yeah, I think. By the way, in the autonomous vehicle, they use even Palmer Luckey's drone OS, machine-powered OS, is SUDA: sense, understand, decide, act. But the thing is that the sense to act delta T, like to go from sensing, understanding, deciding, and acting, that delta T is converging to zero.
Right.
Real time. So to be able to detect an abandoned shopping cart signal, a case that has the tone and sentiment on the phone of the customer really angry because it's business impacting. So you need to make sure the executive sponsor knows. You need to make sure the field service, everybody that touches that account needs to know, because good service is a team sport. Or an opportunity in sales that might be going in the wrong direction. It's no longer a commit. It's gone to like best case or pipeline. So the percent likelihood it's going to close within the fiscal quarter boundaries is degrading in terms of confidence. All these sense, decide, respond, and act. How do you do it? How do you do it when in the B2B the buying decision team is 14, 15 strong?
I think the missing piece, or potentially missing piece, in the agent AI as it's being described to me now, I think it's going to be process, because so much of, like, I talked to somebody this week and they said something that was pretty profound. They were talking about generative AI and agents and all that, and they're like, it's like we have 2030 technology, but our systems are like from 2010.
Yeah.
The systems and processes underlying this.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be the whole, being able to evaluate a process, tweak it, make it more efficient on the fly, and do that behind the scenes. I think that's probably where the big win is. Like right now with Agent AI, I'm really on the phase. I really think we're in the phase where this is another bullet point for that enterprise software disruption part, because I do think it's going to favor platforms, because you need to have a platform to even make this work.
You have to access data,
right?
And data sits across I mean,
And I think,
Gartner's latest research of 1,500 enterprises is only 4% have data that's tagged and ready to be used in language models.
right. Well, that's why you see regulated industries do so well.
Yeah.
Because they had to do this
Store and
just for
access.
Regulators.
Yeah.
Like, who would ever thought regulation was actually made sense? But it has. Like, that's why you see financial services.
Yeah.
You see, healthcare is doing interesting stuff. The other thing it speaks to, I think, is going to be smaller models.
Sure.
That are very use case focused. I think that's going to be big.
Yeah.
But for me right now, I just see this more as like another data point for how enterprise software is changing. So I see that disruption happening. How you price these things, I know Salesforce has $2 a conversation. UiPath is sort of talking like a value model that they're kicking around. Others are like, we'll put in the AI, but we'll raise the SKUs a bit. And it's going to be fascinating to watch, but I don't think that licensing per seat model will work over time. But the problem is, if you're a customer, value-based models make a ton of sense when there's no value. It's like a rev share, right? Everybody wants a rev share when no one has revenue. When you have revenue, right. You're like, why am I giving up half the revenue to this other guy? So that's but yeah.
I think we're all learning as we go.
Right.
I think smart companies are engaged with their customer advisory councils, their partner ecosystem, and they have strong CI competitive intelligence. They have a research capability, and they work with companies like Constellation Research. I mean, your boss is someone that obviously the enterprise is working with to determine how do you monetize AI, and it'll most likely be a hybrid model for some time. But it's people like Ray Wong and others who have an incredible view of the landscape and understand trends, macro trends, who will help guide companies. It's all new. Like I don't believe that experts of yesterday are experts of tomorrow. It's just moving.
No, I think
in my 30 years of tech, I don't think I've ever experienced something that feels like electricity for the 21st century. Like it's going to be asking like the ROI of lights. Like at some point, you're not going to question whether this is hype or this is like, nice to have.
But I don't. Yeah, I think. Because if you are a software vendor and you are charging by seats, well, let's face it, AI means you have less people. You're going to have less new hires. You're going to, you're going to be leaner and meaner. So are you paying by consumption? Like, I think there's, and I've seen this like in vendor earning calls too, where they're trying these models out with their customers too. Like there's a lot of vendors that are talking about, whether it's value or price per conversation or problem resolved or whatever, but they're going to customers and they're kind of whiteboarding some of these things. And I don't think we're really going to know for probably another 18 months what this model is. I do know the model that's not going to work is charging me $10 per user or $30 per user for a Copilot. Because then you're like, who gets it, right? Some people get it, some people don't. So I think the pricing models really needs to be sorted out.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
And you have to have high degree of elasticity, meaning you have to be flexible in terms of how you respond to the market.
Right.
We're gonna talk about certain products and concepts. A digital wallet is something that will be introduced next week. I'm not sure if I'm breaking any news here, and I don't want to steal the thunder from my company's conference.
Honestly, Salesforce stole a lot of their thunder. Like they've announced.
We've been
so many things already.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because honestly, these are big, profound. In some cases, I would say I've known the company for 21 years, 12 years as a customer, and 9 years as an employee. These are big pivots, big conversations, really conversations where, we have to, Mark, our founder, for his entire career, in fact, it's in both of his books, he talks about the importance of a beginner's mind. where you're able to be comfortable learning, unlearning, and relearning. Like right now, companies and business leaders need to have a beginner's mind because frankly, when I'm with CXOs and we talk about capacity planning for use of, let's say, technologies like AI, and I'm not saying this in a disparaging remark towards the CXOs that I work with, there isn't a scientific approach to capacity planning for a lot of these discussions. We don't know. They don't know. So
Right.
we have to be able to provide credits, provide experiments, have elasticity and flexibility in how we work together.
Well, and the other thing is not all this is going to be in the public cloud.
Right.
I
That's
mean,
true.
you know, and then you got the whole, I mean, the one thing that piqued my interest this week was, you know, just there's been a lot of nuclear chatter coming up. And it's because of powering data centers. These little micro reactors you would put next to a data center to, and, you know, I started poking into this because Larry Ellison on the Oracle call just kind of highlighted it. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I just read this nuke story Saturday in Barron's. And you see, and, you know, and by the way, this is not news either. The utilities that play in the space, their stocks look like tech stocks. Like so everybody's missed the run. So, you know, nuclear data centers is not breaking news, but it actually seems like, you know, they're getting over the regulatory hurdles, and you're going to have these little reactors that, you know, because otherwise I don't know where you're getting the energy for half this stuff.
Yeah.
I just don't. You know,
you're bringing a topic that reminds me how a world-class editor-in-chief operates. Always a long view, always in the forefront of emerging new technology, always looking at potential disruptions. What's going to consume Larry's editorial calendar for the next 6 months? Are they certain conferences, books, podcasts, earnings calls? Like, how do you find yourself?
I live in earnings call transcripts.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Great advice. For those of you listening, this is gold wisdom nugget that just got dropped.
And I make sure I read like the buy side stuff. What Ford's saying, what's, you know, pick your enterprise stuff. What are they actually buying? So that's been a thing. I'm really watching the a couple weeks ago, there was CrowdStrike said they signed this huge deal on AWS Marketplace. Benioff said that on Salesforce. And you're looking at these, you're almost like, all right. And it makes a ton of sense.
Sure.
But it's, I mean, if you grew up in enterprise software and you're like, I mean, this sounds like, you know, it used to be you took the CFO out on a golf course or something. You got maybe hammered, maybe not. You come back, tell the CIO like 3 weeks later you signed this deal, and who knows how it happened, but it was all custom and some whatever. So if there's any standardization of software buying, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. So all the enterprise software category I'm looking at closely. I am interested in these smaller models. Like OpenAI yesterday had that OI Mini for STEM.
Yeah, we're grading. We're at Salesforce. We're grading language models because we find if it's used for sales versus marketing versus commerce versus customer support, you have different degrees of accuracy, output, richness. So yeah, large and small, and particular to the job to be done. Yeah.
What was fascinating to me was I'm reading that blog post, and OpenAI is talking about the math scores and all that, and how bad the regular models were at it. And it just hit me. I'm like, my God, this is just like humans. Like, you don't ask a STEM kid to write you a paper.
Right.
You ask a liberal arts kid, right? And you're looking at this, you're like, this is truly
totally
no different. Like I wasn't blessed to have that side of the brain that does math well and all that. Hence the writing. I got to overload because the other side of the brain just doesn't work. But yeah, you're like, it's not different than humans. So these specialized models are like, what does the customer service model look like?
That's right.
In the future?
Right.
What does, and even when you're dealing with these models, Claude acts very different than ChatGPT.
Yeah.
and they're just different animals. And then Gemini is the one that, you know, in my experience, like if I walk in during the day, tell me what's going on, bam, 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 right? Very bullety, which is nice too. But they all have these different, and I think that's just going to proliferate. So every model is going to have its own little shtick, personality,
Totally.
STEM or not STEM. It's going to be very interesting to watch, and it's all going to happen when this enterprise data gets hooked up.
Yeah, for sure. I
Because
used
then you're
to
going to have culture and all that stuff tied in.
Totally. I used to run, you know, I ran engineering, service, and support marketing. So I had interns that worked for me, and I knew the quant intern versus the intern that can write a beautiful summary versus the intern that could create a beautiful presentation.
Right.
Bunch of interns, and I knew exactly how to go. Aaron Ballarado was an intern for me that came from MIT, quant. I mean, he like superpower was numbers and correlation and analysis, but he was not the one that I went to create presentations that I needed to take to the board or to my boss, the CEO. So just knowing you're right. It's exactly a digital replica of how we behave as we outsource our work and collaborate with our fellow human beings. Larry, thank you so much. Thank you so much for subbing in. I know, Ray, it's big shoes to fill, but you did a masterful job because you are a first ballot Hall of Fame inductee to DisrupTV. So anytime we want a Hall of Famer to sub in, we know where to go to. Next week, folks, because of this small conference that I have to go to, we don't have DisrupTV, but we'll be back in 2 weeks, so September 27th, and we have John Kroll, Chief Information Digital Officer at Jewelers Mutual Group. We have Crystal Craycraft, Senior Vice President of Marketing and Digital Business at Jewelers Mutual Group. And we have Barry Ponchi and Sarah Dalton, co-authors of The 5 Talents That Really Matter, How Great Leaders Drive Extraordinary Performance. Last year, we had 70 authors on our show, and I think we're going to break 70 this year. So pretty awesome. In fact, I don't think we've had an episode without an author on the show. So it's been a great year to learn from best-selling authors. If it's Friday, it's DisrupTV. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.
Have a good weekend, folks.
Thank you, Larry.